And now for tonight's presentation. Mark Dahmke grew up in Osceola, Nebraska, went to high school in David City, and studied computer science at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. In 1979, he started a business out of his dorm room and developed speech synthesizer software for his friend, Bill Rush, who had cerebral palsy. This project was featured in Life magazine in 1980. Mark was also a consulting editor at Byte magazine from 1980 to 1987 and published several books with McGraw-Hill on microcomputer operating systems. In the 1980s, he was a consultant for IBM's Entry Systems division, working on video disk device drivers and computer-based training applications. He worked on projects for the Nebraska Research and Development Authority and for the Lincoln Telephone, and helped develop their Navix internet service. Mark and Ken Livingston started Information Analytics in 1995, providing software development, web design, and hosting services. The business was sold in 2015, and he is currently semi-retired and pursuing other interests, including commercial drone photography. He's been an amateur astronomer and photographer since the age of 10. He's a member of the Prairie Astronomy Club and serves on the Board of Supervisors at Hyde Observatory. He has been a member of the Lincoln Torch Club since 1986. His paper tonight is entitled, What I Didn't See. Let's welcome Mark Dahmke.
This is a modified version of a presentation I gave at the Prairie Astronomy Club in January. And let's see here if this all works. There, great. Okay, so part one of this talk is about the aurora and what causes it, how to view it, and where. And the second half of my paper is about my November trip to the island of Svalbard in the Arctic in search of the Northern Lights. And it's about the location and history of the island and the polar night and astronomy. I know this veers into travel log a little bit, which we're not technically supposed to do, but I think there's enough else there that find it interesting. So what causes the Northern Lights? The technical description is the outer atmosphere of the sun, also called the corona, is structured by strong magnetic fields. When the magnetic field lines tangle, they produce strong localized magnetic fields that can break through the surface of the sun at active regions. This sometimes causes sunspot groups and can cause the magnetic field to disconnect and eject charged particles. A large coronal mass ejection can contain billions of tons of matter accelerated to several million miles per hour. When the charged particles hit atoms in the Earth's atmosphere, they excite those atoms, causing them to emit light. Now, here's the animated version. Okay, so convection cells in the sun create magnetic fields. The surface cools and sunspots appear. The plasma drags the magnetic field outward. The field stretches and twists and then breaks free. So now several billion tons of charged particles or plasma pulls away from the sun and becomes a solar storm. Like that. And on that scale, the Earth would be a little marble. Okay, so 18 hours later, assuming that the storm is aimed at us, it reaches the Earth. The magnetic field lines of the Earth's magnetic field act as a shield from these high energy particles. The magnetic fields couple and the gas streams down on the daylight side. And then the field stretches back and couples again and then breaks. Okay, then those charged particles stream down along the magnetic field lines, and that's the nighttime aurora. So most of the colors and the lights that you see are from happening about 60 to 400 miles above the surface in the ionosphere. The colors are produced when the charged particles strike atoms or molecules in the atmosphere. It's basically the same thing that happens in a neon tube. If you apply electricity, it will glow from the photons that are produced by those atoms. Okay, the KP index is used as a way to describe the level of disturbance of the magnetic field caused by the solar wind on a scale of 0 to 9. And there's also the G scale. A minor storm is rated at KP5 or G1. The probability of occurrence is about 900 days out of every 11-year solar cycle. The sun goes in cycles of sunspots and solar activity. As an extreme storm, KP9 or G5 might occur only 4 days out of every 11-year cycle. So, how far south can the aurora be seen? Let's take a look at the probability of occurrence at different latitudes. As shown here, Nebraska is between G3 and G5 bands of probability. So the probability there is of seeing it is maybe 130 days out of every 11 years to see a large display. When it does occur, what you'll see in the middle of the US is not very dramatic. However, an extreme storm can push those bands further south. This is the from the NOAA space weather site, and that's the aurora forecast. So for the best viewing opportunities, you want to be close to that oval. Can we see the aurora from Nebraska? Based on that criteria, in the previous slides, it doesn't look very promising, but occasionally it does happen. The best viewing opportunities will be when the KP is greater than 6, or from an extremely dark site with good seeing, meaning no haze or city lights. Here are some photos, and the lighting in here isn't very good, but these were taken by some friends of mine out at the Nebraska Star Party by Merritt Reservoir near Valentine. You can see those sort of vertical stripes. So in Nebraska, unless it's a really powerful storm, that's the best you're going to see. And oftentimes it'll look just like clouds or glow in the distance, and sometimes it'll look like the glow of city lights at the horizon. Okay, aurora forecasts. Just as we have terrestrial weather reports, there are also space weather forecasts. And again, the best place to go is the NOAA space weather site. And there are also several nice phone apps like Aurora and Space Weather Live that will tell you pretty much everything you want to know about the aurora and your location. And they'll also do push notifications to your phone to notify you when there's some activity in the area. Colors. As mentioned earlier, when plasma from the sun hits the Earth's atmosphere, it excites the molecules and they give off photons. So the electrons stream in along the field lines, and they're excited to a higher energy level. And when they return to the previous energy state, then they give off colors. So at the highest altitudes, the ionosphere will you'll generally see red emitting or light emitted from atomic oxygen. At lower altitudes, more frequent collisions cause green light, and sometimes that dominates over the red. At yet lower altitudes, where atomic oxygen is not common, molecular nitrogen gives off light producing red and blue. Yellow and pink are sometimes present and are a mix of red, green, and blue. Other shades such as orange are possible. Yellow-green is also moderately common. Auroral shapes vary depending on the altitude and your viewing angle. For example, they can appear as a mild glow on the horizon, sometimes as patches or surfaces that look like clouds. In some cases, you'll see arcs that curve across the sky or rays that look like light and dark stripes. Coronas sometimes cover much of the sky, especially far up north, and appear to diverge from one point. They often look like curtains coming down in all directions. There's some samples. Best times to see the aurora. Spring and fall are generally the best for stable weather. November to February offers the darkest skies and longer evenings. The strongest lights tend to appear between 9 and 2, although the best is generally 11 to midnight. The aurora can also occur during the daytime, but you won't usually see that unless you're at high latitudes. Okay, best places to view. So, yeah, the best place to be is up there at the Arctic Circle, within about 1,500 miles of the North Pole. Occasionally, down in Alaska, in Canada, but for the best displays, go north. And while I was doing my research, I found a few interesting places. Look at that. And Tromsø is way up at the far north end of Norway. This one is in Fairbanks. And this hotel has its own observatory. Look at that. And that brings us to Svalbard. So, part 2, where is Svalbard? It's 78 degrees north latitude, 500 miles north of Norway, and 800 miles from the North Pole. Okay. And interruption here, I'm also an aviation enthusiast, so for me, part of this is the journey and what I can see from 30,000 feet. And here's a little example. I occupy my time on red-eye flights, taking, when possible, pictures out the window. And then when I get home, I can line those up with star charts and figure out what I was looking at and where I was at the time. But there's an easier way to do that now. Did you know that you can go to FlightAware and put in your flight number and the date, and download your flight path and display it on Google Earth? It's very handy for keeping track of where you've been if you do a lot of traveling. This is the actual flight path from my trip in November. And if you're interested in such things, I'd like to recommend the book Skyfaring. This was written by a commercial pilot. It includes some interesting stories about flying long-haul polar routes and a little astronomy and navigation thrown in. Svalbard is an island archipelago. The largest town is named after John Longyear, an American whose Arctic coal company was established in 1906. There's a permanent population of about 2,500. There are more polar bears than people on the islands, although you generally don't see them near town. So there's just showing where Svalbard is and the terminator for November 1st. And here's a size comparison. It's about 200 miles wide and 300 miles long. I had heard of Svalbard, but never really paid much attention to it until I discovered Cecilia Blomdahl's YouTube channel. She's made dozens of videos that will tell you everything you ever wanted to know about living on Svalbard. But what got my attention were her photos and videos of the Northern Lights. Here's a short sample. Okay. Back in 2020, I emailed her to ask if she'd be interested in doing a Zoom presentation for our astronomy club, but she didn't have time. So one evening while I was watching one of her videos, I just decided to go there because it's there. Here's a little sample of daylight footage just to set the stage. Okay. Some fun facts. It's the northernmost permanent settlement in the world. Anyone can live there. It's a visa-free zone. And what that means is that you don't have to get a residency permit if you can support yourself and find a place to live, which is the hard part. Generally, it's employers who make sure that their employees have a place to live, but you can buy a house if one becomes available. It has the global seed vault that was mentioned in a torch paper presented to this club in 2020 by Steve Schaff of the Des Moines Club, which I'll show later. The whole town was built on permafrost. However, it's the fastest warming place on the planet, so the permafrost is starting to melt. It's an ongoing problem because they have to retrofit foundations under many of the buildings. It's an Arctic science hub. The University Center is a state-owned company involved in research and provides some higher education in Arctic studies. Its unique location permits the study of Arctic biology, geology, geophysics, and Arctic technology in situ to 800 students from more than 40 countries. In 1920, following the Paris Peace Conference, the Svalbard Treaty was signed, granting full sovereignty to Norway. However, all signatory countries were granted non-discriminatory rights to fishing, hunting, and mineral resources. Svalbard was discovered in 1596, but prior to the 20th century, the islands were used as a base for Arctic exploration and tourism, but there were few permanent residents and no indigenous population. The first coal mining operations began in the 1890s, but most of the mines are shut down now, and the economy is mostly based on tourism. There's still one active coal mine, and it produces coal that's used in producing specific alloys of steel that are hard to make with any other source of coal. There's also a Russian town named Barentsburg, about 20 miles west of Longyearbyen, the largest town, with a population of about 450. And there's Pyramiden, which is an abandoned Russian town that's 30 miles east and is now a tourist attraction. It was founded by Sweden in 1910 and sold to the Soviet Union in 1927 and operated by a Russian mining company. It once had a population of about 1,000. Pyramiden was abandoned in 1998 with most of the buildings still intact, literally frozen in time. Since 2007, there have been many efforts to make it a tourist attraction. The town's hotel was renovated and reopened in 2013. In the summer, there's a population of 6 caretakers, plus some polar bears. Because of its isolation, it has been said that Pyramiden was the only truly socialist society ever perfected by the former Soviet Union. It even outlasted the Soviet Union. Svalbard is a great place for dark sky observing for amateur astronomers. There's just one little complication. There's an arbitrary perimeter around the town that's not fenced, but wherever you see these signs on the road, it means that you can't go beyond that point unless you have a gun or with someone who has a gun, and it's mandatory. Every resident is trained and certified to carry a gun. It's very rare that a polar bear wanders into the village, but maybe about once a year. It does happen and they have to deal with it. I had to throw this one in. That's a Dali-generated cartoon, and I added my own captions. The woman sitting next to me on the flight to Svalbard showed me pictures of a polar bear rummaging around outside of her apartment building. She said that I'd be safe as long as I stayed under the streets, on the streets under the pole lights, but not to wander off into the darkness. That's great advice, but is not convenient for someone who wants to take pictures of the night sky. More about that later. Svalbard is also home to a KSAT terminal. This facility connects fiber optic cables from Europe to geostationary satellites that are almost always visible from Svalbard. This also means that Svalbard has faster internet access than many places on the mainland. Svalbard's economy is now based on tourism. Depending on the season, you can find a tour operator for just about any outdoor activity you can think of. And there are lots of things to see and do here, including visiting a coal mine, glaciers, wildlife, ice caves, and the global seed vault. The Global Seed Vault was built to protect the world's food stock from disasters ranging from nuclear war to global warming. The vault was built in permafrost caves in 2008. It has seed samples from nearly every country in the world and played an essential role between 2015 and 19 in rebuilding seed collections damaged during the war in Syria. The vault is only open 3 times a year to limit the seed's exposure to the outside world. Recently, they added about another 19,500 seeds from around the world, bringing the total to over 1.2 million. Seeds are stored at 0 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 18 C. Although tours are not allowed, there is now an online virtual tour. I planned my trip to coincide with the start of polar night because my main reason was to see the northern lights. This chart shows the amount of twilight for November 1st. I wanted a little twilight for sightseeing. The sun set on October 27th and would not return until the 19th of February. At noon on November 1st, the sun is 2 degrees below the horizon, so twilight lasts for hours. The maximum brightness at noon was comparable to twilight here 30 minutes after sunset. And this chart just shows the amount of daylight and twilight throughout the year. And on the right is November 1st, the vertical line. And in this case, there's no daylight at all, and civil twilight runs from about 8:40 to 2:40 p.m., and there's about 9.5 hours of darkness. Okay, this one's a bit dark, but that on the left is the Svalbard sky through 24 hours. And on the right is our images captured from the Svalbard webcam. And so you can see the twilight coming up. It actually didn't get that bright. That was because of the auto exposure on their webcam. So it was not nearly as bright as that. So off into the polar night. The flight from Oslo to Tromsø took about an hour and 45 minutes, and I arrived at 11:45. Sunset at Tromsø would be at 2:45 p.m. This photo was taken just south of Tromsø. The flight from Tromsø to Svalbard was also about an hour 45, and that left it to 12:20. So here is for example, when flying west, we experience a slightly longer day because the plane is catching up a little bit with the sun. At middle latitudes, the speed of the Earth's rotation is about 900 miles per hour. But when going north, we're losing the sun over the curve of the Earth. So as I was flying north, I expected the sun to drop below the horizon at 1:15. So there's at 1 o'clock, there's a little bit of sun peeking through the window right at the horizon, almost due south. At 1:15, you can see a little bit of sun on the window, and about halfway there. And 1:30, no more sun. I had calculated that I'd lose the sun at 1:15, but I forgot to take into account the altitude of the plane, so it lasted about 15 minutes longer than I expected. Almost there. Svalbard is now quite accessible compared to 20 years ago. Flights occur every other day, and the round trip from Oslo is only about $350. Compared to the cost and time of going to Antarctica, for example, getting close to the North Pole is surprisingly affordable. So next is the landing, and at this point, 1:45, the sun is 2 degrees below the horizon, and that's the entire town. Just amazing to actually see that in person out the window. And this is they have hotel buildings scattered all over town. So this is my room. I booked the smallest, cheapest room I could find, and even that was in the $200 range. I expected my entire room to be this size, but I got a free upgrade. And I'm not sure how. But anyway, I wasn't going to complain because this included a kitchen and a washing machine. And I said, no one said why, but I gave them a very good review on TripAdvisor. And a view out of my window. Okay, so this is Main Street, and my apartment was up there on the 3rd floor. It's a nice location, except that it's above the bar. And that was okay until Saturday night. I didn't get to sleep until after 3. So here we are, northernmost town in the world, almost the northernmost bar in the world. Everything looks pretty normal, like any other place I visited. But I can't adequately convey what this looked like. Twilight lasts for hours. That's why the photographers call it the blue hour. I tried to adjust the brightness of this photo to match what I saw, but it's impossible to get right. The last bit of sunlight scattering through the upper atmosphere hit the snow on the mountains, producing a ghostly pale yellow. It just didn't look real. I stood there for about half an hour just staring at it. Here's a view the next morning, and this is a time exposure because it was still, it was darker than this in reality. The large building in the foreground there is the museum and university. So there's a bit more twilight, and let's see, what was I going to say? Someone described Svalbard as like walking into a painting. The mountains are just incredible there. Okay, reindeer, just hanging out in the middle of town. They're very friendly, and they aren't afraid of people, and nothing to worry about. I wish I could have gotten a better picture, but I only had my phone with me when I was out walking that time. And so this was I captured from the Svalbard webcam, the Longyearbyen webcam at the university, right at that same time. So that's me watching the reindeer, and there's the reindeer watching me. I found out later that fenced-in area is a playground. They fenced it in so the kids can take their sleds there and slide down that hill without anyone, getting in the way, or snowmobiles or anything. This is the statue of the unknown miner statue to commemorate all the miners who lost their lives on Svalbard. And again, it's too dark in here, but this was taken, well, I'll just move on. This is a 20-second exposure of the same shot. And this was taken up near the shooting range. I took a photo tour, and the guide took us up there because it's a nice dark spot. It's also not far from the airport and the seed vault. So I went on 2 photo tours while I was there. The first night it was completely overcast, so the guide instead took us to one of the old mine sites, and then we went on a hike up to the Ice Cat Observatory. There were 7 of us on this photo tour, plus a guide, a Swedish college student. This was taken at one of the mines, and you can see the glow of the lights of the town in the distance, about 5 miles away. So we put on ice cleats and headlamps and went for a hike. Okay, this is IceCat, which is short for European Incoherent Scatter Scientific Association. They operate 3 scatter radar systems that are used to study the interaction between the sun and the earth as revealed by disturbances in the ionosphere and magnetosphere. And this is another 15-second time exposure. It's very dark out there. And that's the town in the distance. And in the foreground is a frozen lake. And that box is a water pump. And the lake is used as a reservoir. So there's IceCat lower right, and the airport. That's about 7 miles to town. And the seed vault, KSAT, and airport on the other side. Okay. So here's a 360 pano, 15-second exposure. And let's see. So yeah, also they were having a heat wave when I was there. It was hovering around 32 the entire time. It was very pleasant, and normally a lot colder, but I was pleasantly surprised, and it was better than I expected. And it wasn't windy at all, fortunately. And even way out there on that frozen mountain, I still had good signal strength on my phone and I could check my email. So there were times when I could see the stars. I had to check the sky every hour or so because the forecasts were not reliable and you can never tell when it would clear up. And so this was taken 3 p.m. looking southwest. And I did these constellation overlays just to give an idea of what you're looking at. The next one is better. That's Arcturus in the constellation Boötes, 3:15 in the afternoon. And this one is, let's see, I was standing with my back to the hotel building, and at the top you can see the wall of as a reference. And right up there at the top behind the building is Polaris. And you can see the Little Dipper, Ursa Minor, and Cassiopeia over on the left. So that's looking, just pointing the camera straight up. And that's one of the things about when you're close to the North Pole, you can't use the North Star for direction finding because it's straight overhead. And here's another 7 a.m. That's Mars, the bright one in the center. And that I took that through my window, so there's some reflection on the top there of the ceiling. Now here, there's one bright object above where it says north, and that is Mars. And this was taken at 3 p.m. in the afternoon looking north. It's very strange to see stars or, see Mars in the north, let alone in the daytime. And one more, this is Cygnus. And here is Hercules above the hotel buildings. Again, it's kind of too bright in here for these. Okay, second attempt. Went out a couple of days later. The clouds were broken, and this time it was a tour with just a couple from Germany and a French tour guide. And of course, the aurora is there, but it's behind the darn clouds. So you'll see bright spots that I was frantically pointing the camera, trying to catch whatever was come along. There it is, those bright spots. There it went. There it is again. So that's how it goes. Okay, this is a time lapse I shot from my bedroom window. There are several things to look for here. The stars are moving horizontally. Of course, again, in here, it's kind of hard to see up at the top. There are some stars as it starts the animation. Also, partway in, you'll see the lights go out. And then the moon will come up and Jupiter. There we go. Okay. Wasn't it nice of them to have that power outage just for me? Yeah. Yeah, you can see a few stars are just moving horizontally there. And there's the moon and Jupiter down at the bottom, right above the top of the ridge. There's Jupiter. And then the clouds moved in, and that was the end of that. And this is just a replay. But it's just really interesting seeing, the stars just go around. They don't rise or set. It's all circumpolar, and it's just very strange. Okay, some more snapshots. This is a panorama I shot. They have sort of a tourist information display there. And again, there's the university building. And this is one of the mine sites that is now closed. Again, that's a time exposure. It was not nearly that bright out at night. And all the pipes are above ground because of the permafrost, and they actually have a centralized heating plant, kind of like the university. They pump hot water all over the town and then reheat it in each of the buildings. And the grocery store, built a few years ago, they keep about 3 months worth of supplies in case the ships can't reach them in the winter. And this is 2:30 in the afternoon. Just a guy out walking home with his gun in tow there. In fact, I think they said there are more snowmobiles than people there too. And lots of nice upscale shops and outfitters everywhere. Reindeer stew. And the breakfast buffet. The hotels were very nice, very modern, and all the amenities that you would expect. Okay, I had seen pictures of their direction sign at the airport, so I made my own sign and took it with me so I could get this shot. Okay, airport, nice airport. And on the way back, I could see a little bit of twilight. This was at 2 in the afternoon, so even at Tromsø, the sun was setting, well, it had set by the time I landed there. And then I went back to Oslo and got there at 7 p.m., got up at 7 for a 7 a.m. flight. And so I didn't see the sun until the next day in London. And even then it was cloudy. So obviously, you probably figured out what I didn't see was the northern lights, except through clouds. So, however, I pulled these photos from Facebook. They have a web page just for Svalbard northern lights, and these were all taken within a week or so after I was there. So next, probably Iceland. Still thinking about it, but I'll give it another try. Anyway, and this just from here is just wallpaper I shot with my 360 camera and just put that up there. It's a walking tour around town. So anyway, thank you very much. Oh, yeah.
Can I ask the first
Yeah.
question?
Mhm.
All right. It's an amazing coincidence. I can really identify with your pain because my brother and I were in Iceland the same week. We were
Really?
there trying to see the Aurora Borealis, and it was too cloudy. We weren't able to see it.
Mm.
What struck me about being in the land of fire and ice was thinking, what did all the people up here think before they had scientific
Mhm.
explanations? What did you in your research find any like mythological or religious, kind of explanations or narratives about what these lights in the sky might be?
Yeah, there are, and I've read them, but it's been years and years, and I really haven't. I didn't put do any research on that specifically for this time, but yeah, they're especially in the Eskimo populations there. Yeah.
Question about the seed repository. How was that chosen? I mean, what was the process, and why is it there?
Yeah, there. Let's see. I think what happened, if I remember correctly, there was someone storing seeds at low temperatures, and then they got the idea that, well, if we store this in permafrost, that it's going to be nice and stable. And since the mines were closing up there, I don't know if it was the university's idea, but they decided to try it. So yeah. The beauty of that is that even though they have cooling systems to maintain a very stable temperature, is designed so that even if the power fails, that they can go for months or longer without a problem, because the permafrost will hold it at a very stable temperature, probably even for years.
So Mark, do you know if there was any history up there for earthquakes?
I didn't run into anything on that, so I imagine so, but there was no general talk of it like it was a recurring problem. So no.
Yeah, I think because they put that seed suppository there, the seed place, seed place there, it probably had to be pretty stable, I would think.
Yeah, I imagine
Okay.
that was a
All right.
criteria. Yeah.
So does the incidence of our ability to see the northern lights, does that change over time? Because it seems to me that when I was a kid in Nebraska, 2 or 3 times I saw them. And now, as you explain, it's fairly rare that we would get that opportunity. Has that changed over time?
Well, I think the bulk of it is because of light pollution. There's just so much sky glow now that competes with it that, if you lived in a really dark site, we have problems going out and finding observing sites even 30 miles out of Lincoln because there's sky glow in every direction, and it just messes with it. It's nowhere near as dark as it was when, back in the 60s. Yeah.
Also, is there a sound associated with the northern lights?
There is, and it has to do with electrical discharge, and it usually seems to have more to do with, like, if you're out in a field or there's a lot of tall grass around, and for some reason there's something going on there. I read a paper on that, but it's a long time ago, and I don't recall all the details. But yes, there's crackling sounds. Yeah.
I'm curious about how people get around. I imagine it would be like the early prairies where everything is a road and there is no road. It's all permafrost. Nobody builds a road, right?
There are paved roads.
There are?
Yeah, in town, they're mostly, asphalt, and to and from the airport, you can go east and west of town, 10, 15 miles. So yeah, there's some gravel as well, but there are some paved roads. And that one, yes, I believe so. That's actually more of a pedestrian walkway, but people do drive their cars up there sometimes. So, yeah, snowmobiles and, any kind of, sort of tractor type thing. But yeah, you wouldn't want to go out there and maybe a 4-wheel drive, but they actually have buses and or tour buses and other vehicles that are, that have tracks on them, or a lot more wheels that they can and enough power to deal with that. So, but yeah, there's the grocery store and the parking lot. So there's a lot of people have cars, but during the winter, snowmobile is the preferred method.
Mark?
Mhm.
Mark?
Yeah.
A couple things. One, when I was growing up, a long, long time ago, and we'd sleep in the backyard, we'd see the northern lights, but there were no street lights.
Mhm.
There were no outside lights.
Yeah.
And as recently as maybe 10 years ago, driving on Interstate 80,
Mhm.
Lexington, somewhere maybe before that, I saw them.
Mhm.
But off in the distance and very poor.
Yeah, and yeah, it just, if you know what you're looking for, and there aren't, there's not a lot of light pollution, you can see them, but it's just not, they're usually low on the horizon, and those vertical bands, they're not overhead and really dramatic like.
So could you see them in this place where they go every year for the star stuff? And
The shots, yeah, those earlier photos that I had at the beginning, that those were taken at the Nebraska Star Party, but that was like 10 years ago, and I haven't heard any reports in the last 10 years from out at NSP, which is in July. It's not the best time to see them. And
have they been captured or photographed from space?
yes. Mhm. Yeah. From ISS, there are a lot of photos out there of the northern lights looking from above. Yeah. Just Google, you'll find them. They're all over the place. Mhm.
Is this on? Yeah. Thanks. But most of what we saw that you saw, and was also the Facebook photos, were all green
Mhm.
hue, but not blue. I'm just curious why they were all in that particular wavelength band, you think?
Part of that is, I suspect that most of those photos were taken with phone cameras, and they don't at night always get the white balance right. But also, you don't generally see as much blue unless you have a really energetic storm. You know, the more powerful storms, the more the particles can reach down further into the atmosphere, and that's where you get blue light. So blues and pinks, you generally don't see those nearly as often as the reds, yellows, you know, and greens.
I guess the other thing, knowing how the sun spots work, it's the
Mhm.
7-year cycle, right?
11, yeah.
11. Okay. You didn't really give us the data with that in mind, but the storms change over those periods? Or-
Yeah, and right now we're heading toward peak in like next year or so. But lately the sun has been very active, and so there's been a lot more. You know, we've had some recent weeks, and I suspect we're in for even more in the near future. So we might have a chance of seeing some here. But yeah, at the low point of the cycle, we went through a period where there were no sunspots at all, like even longer than normal, even after it started back on the uptick toward the peak of the cycle. And so the theorists are busy trying to figure out why it didn't correlate with what they expected in their models. So yeah, the sun appears to be entering a phase when it's a little bit more variable than it used to be. And so we could end up seeing a lot more activity. As a matter of fact, just a couple of days ago, there's an article about that there was a large solar flare and discharge that was fortunately aimed away from us. It was pointing in the other direction from on the other side of the sun. If that had pointed directly at us, we would probably be experiencing power outages. And also, there's a thing called, back in the 1850s, called the Carrington event. And we have not experienced an event like that since. And it's like earthquakes. Eventually, one's going to get you. It was so powerful that at the time, which, you know, telegraph wires was all they had, that the wires on the poles were catching fire because when the energy from these discharges creates an electric current in any long conductor. So even without hooking their batteries up to the telegraph, they could send messages just based on the power in the lines from the sun. If that happened today at that level, it would fry most of our electronics, because most of the chips that we use are not protected against that. So if that ever happens and there's enough warning, what they'll do is selectively shut down and isolate the power grid substations that are likely to be damaged by that, to protect them, because those substation transformers are expensive and take years to replace. So if it happened like that again, you know, we could see massive outages that would take months to years to repair.
Mark, I'm wondering whether there are literary studies within the Arctic Studies program, and if so, I'm wondering what it would be. Viking sagas. It seems that did Vikings go that far north? Yeah, and well, definitely Iceland. So yeah, I would expect, and it's something that I need to get up to speed on. I know it's interesting. I just haven't had time to find any good sources on that. Iceland, the shops in Reykjavik have, of course, a full range of the sagas. Penguin has put many of them out. Yeah. Okay. Cheers.
So tell us about the bears. Did you see any?
Fortunately,
any
no.
shot around you? Are they
No.
really as vicious and violent as they say?
Yes, and fortunately, I didn't see any, so that's a good thing. Yeah, as the cartoon suggests, and that the other one, you definitely, you know, if you encounter a polar bear, you know, other bears you can maybe scare off or deal with, but there's no reasoning with a polar bear. So if you're in there, if you're visible to them, they're probably going to come and attack you. So That's the other thing that's interesting up there. Of course, it's a small town. It's extremely safe. So nobody locks their doors. They leave the keys in the car. And part of the reason for doing that is historical, because if you polar bear did wander into town and you need to find a safe place fast, you can duck into anybody's apartment. There are, like I said, there's a lot of them, but they're spread across that island chain, and probably on the main island, or where the town is, there may be a few hundred, but they're spread out over thousands of square miles.
So tying together Penny's paper from last month and your paper, is climate change having any effect, or is this in any way affecting the climate?
Yes, it's definitely having an effect, and they are very aware of it there, because they've been having more heat waves, meaning like when I was there, it should have been more like closer to 10 degrees or in that range for that time of year. So it was well above normal. And as I said, they've been retrofitting buildings because of the melting permafrost, so they have to shore up foundations. There are more avalanches, and that's also a problem. They've got avalanche barriers on the mountains, but several of the apartment buildings that were built in a place that is now too risky have been abandoned, and they're tearing them down because it's just not safe to live that close to the mountain where the avalanches occur.
Oh, I had a question. It's more locally related to Nebraska, in that there is more increased light pollution. I've heard that because Nebraska ranks so low in tourism, one area that they're trying to increase is sky tourism or astro tourism in Western Nebraska, like Sioux County, to create like in federally reserved, this is a dark sky preserve.
Right.
What information do you know about that movement?
Some friends of mine were on that committee, and Jenna Barcha over in tourism, in Nebraska tourism, was instrumental in getting the dark sky designation for Merritt Reservoir, and that's it's a certification that's not actually federal. It's the International Dark Sky Association, and they've set criteria for having full cutoff lights and making sure that there's no sources of light pollution, and that it's maintained that way. And so with that certification, then you get more visibility and bragging rights for that. But there also are many like B&Bs and ranches that are going after that, so that they can be of interest to astrotourism for astronomers. And anyway, the Lincoln Club and the Omaha Club are actively involved in working on that too, and we've also occasionally had some doing some testifying at the city council about street lights and things. So yeah. Thank you.